Hello. I'm going to do a video here about what the energy clearing, the Sushumna clearing, is all about, based on all the things that I've gathered and understood, just to give context for those that are going to be doing or clearing or have done one and would like to understand more about it. So as I started to heal and clear, my hands started to move automatically in meditation. And when I honored that in Vipassana retreats or on my own, my hands would start moving and it would be an activation of my higher self within my system. And initially it was just, I felt like it was releasing sankharas or rigidity in my body, in my system. So it was just basically a self-healing that I was experiencing. And my body would move in different ways, whether I was in like psychedelic retreats or even in Vipassana, I started experiencing movement. Then when I started the coaching, we were led to creating a coaching program. And initially it was meant to be just a quick body scan or a way to just relax before we started the coaching session. And I would do this kind of quick clear of the energy within someone's system. And then my business partner had an intuitive hit. It said, I feel like you should slow it down and see what happens when you do the body scan, a quick clear. And when I slowed it down and I just allowed my hands to move, they started moving in a circular manner. And then I started noticing that they were going to each of the chakras. I could actually feel the texture of each chakra. Each one was different. And then when I would continue tuning into what felt like it was intuitively coming to me, I would start feeling like releases in the back of my neck, like almost like I would just do something like that and I would feel like something moved. And then my clients would start describing that things were moving. They'd start feeling like twinges of pain, and when I would do this, I'd feel a release and their pain would go away. So I started seeing things like that I was amazed by, surprised by. And then they would be describing how pains and headaches or different symptoms had started to disappear and shifts that were happening in their life, like their ability to stay more grounded or calm, and relationships in their lives were getting better, their work performance, their ability to start tuning into their potential or purpose. I started seeing these shifts happening. So this continued, and we started to see more and more miraculous shifts happening. And what would happen was, as I would be doing this, I would start feeling magnetic energy in my hands. And I wasn't sure what it was, but I would notice it every so often or after clearing a certain amount of time. And then I would notice that I would actually even start to describe it like my hands feel like they're wading through soft clouds or soft water, like plasma. I don't know what plasma feels like. I haven't studied plasma. I've heard of it, but I don't know what it would feel like. But this is what was coming to me intuitively. So sometimes I would say that. I would say, it feels like plasma. And what I would ask them as I was moving, I would have them envision a gentle twister that was scanning the chakra or the body part and clearing it of any excess energy, debris, and things that don't serve us. So this is something I would say. And then in December of 2025, I was led to this series of videos with David Clements. And he's a theoretical physicist that went to Oxford and Cambridge, was doing a PhD in string theory. And he started talking about how he connected to his higher self and his journey. And it was exactly the same way that I had connected to my higher self. And I hadn't met anyone that could explain what was happening or what I was moving through. And he was explaining it through his own journey. So what he basically said that really drew me in, I started tuning into his content. And he basically then described the physics of the new world, which isn't mainstream yet. And it was literally the same things that I was moving through. He said that the reason that we age is because the telomeres, the protective end caps of the chromosomes within cells that are responsible for cloning or duplication, start to shorten, and then we age. And what he said was that the analogy he used was, it's like making a photocopy and taking the copy and making a photocopy and taking the copy. And over time, it degrades. It gets worse and worse because the errors propagate. If I get a crease or a fold or a crinkle or something in my paper, it's in all the future copies. So it continues to degrade. There's nothing that self-corrects to the original. So then it deteriorates over time. And he said that's why humans age. But if there was a way to self-correct or self-heal, we wouldn't have to age. We would leave the planet when we're done learning. And what he said then was, the way to tap into self-organizing, self-healing is to tap into plasma. And he mentioned David Bohm, who's a quantum physicist, who, as coincidences go, I was led to back when I was leaving Google around 2024. And I wasn't sure why. There was a course, MIT Presencing Institute, that was all about dialogue, based on the work of David Bohm as an original kind of concept. And I was working with a group, and that couple of them had mentioned, based on the things I was talking about and things I was interested in, that it might be worth tuning into his work. So I ended up reading his book and tuning into his documentary and really starting to look at his work, and he had studied plasma. And what he studied, that David Clements was now referring to, was that plasma is uncompressed matter. In this plane, it's very compressed, very dense. Matter is very dense here. In many parts of the universe, it's very low density. It's not as dense as it is on Earth. And so because of this level of density, it has certain characteristics that we experience in this plane. And he said that if you uncompress matter, like David Bohm studied, the matter starts to develop quantum characteristics, including self-healing or self-organizing. So I was very intrigued because they're using the word plasma, and that's what was coming to me. And then what he mentioned was Nikola Tesla, the famous scientist, way ahead of his time, studied many things that became, for example, mainstream science. But one of the things that he didn't fully get to finish his work with, he died before he finished it, was around this concept of living energetics or bioenergetics. And there were a couple of theoretical physicists after that took those concepts further. And what they did was they made a transformer. So Tom Bearden and John Bedini were the two theoretical physicists. And they were led to basically, if you think of a transformer, it's an iron core. You put coils around it, you put a current through the coils, and you end up with an electromagnetic field. So basic electromagnetism. And what they were led to do was to make the coils in the form of a double helix around the iron core, to spin it and to put a current through. And what they found was they were getting more current out than they were putting in, which all the modern physicists said isn't possible. It defies the laws of physics, so they blew off, dismissed these physicists. So they called David Clements when he was at Oxford at the time and asked him to come over and say, can you derive a mathematical model to explain how the hell are we generating more energy than we put in? Anyway, as he got closer, his higher self and guides said, there's no current math that will explain what they're doing here. You're wasting your time. So he left. He was led to the same thing. And then what he was told or shown was that this is energy of the new world, unlimited sources of energy, perpetual energy machines. Our current physics, our current conditioning, our current assumptions, and what we experience in the third dimension on Earth is limited sources of energy. But we actually have access to unlimited sources of energy. And then what they showed him was the Caduceus, which is a medical symbol. It's two snakes wrapped around a central shaft. And they said ancient medicines, Ayurveda medicine, Chinese medicine, knew this and employed it in all of the practices, but it's been lost for a number of different reasons over the centuries. And then what was interesting for me anyway, is that I was sharing this with my sister, who's an Ayurveda doctor, and she ran upstairs and grabbed this book when I was sharing all this with her. She turned to, I don't know, page 500 of the 700 pages of this Hatha Yoga Pratipada, I think it's called, and turned to this page, and it was talking about Hatha Yoga. And what they were talking about was basically that the path to enlightenment, as per Hatha Yoga, is you basically have a central energetic channel, the Sushumna, which has all the chakras in it. It's along the spine. And if you clear the chakras of the trauma or the blocks, and you now activate two energetic channels that wrap around that central shaft and converge at the third eye, Ida and Pingala, they're called. And you do that through breathing. You can then get to the first stage of enlightenment. And then the Kundalini energy of the new world will rise from the base up the spine, and you can get to the second stage of enlightenment. And what was fascinating was David Clements talks about how the frequency is rising on the planet right now. So a lot of trauma is coming to the surface and magnifying, amplifying. Because as the frequency rises, all the low frequency, low vibrational stuff is coming to the surface. And so that's trauma, conditioning, blocks. So more and more people are going to experience emotional and physical pain, more trauma coming to the surface, more amplification of injury, illness, disease. And then they have a choice, assuming they're aware and capable, of releasing it or transmuting that energy, that low vibration energy from their system and stepping into the higher frequency that's on the earth, or they're going to get increasingly sick and ill until they have to leave the planet. So that's what's happening. And the hope is that we can help as people fall into more darkness and more pain. They may then start seeking ways to clear and heal, and that's for alternative healing, energy healing programs. So my prediction is that as the collective is going into more darkness, which I believe will happen for the next 6 to 12 months, more and more people will be drawn to energy healing and alternative healing. And then as they clear, more of them will be drawn to that, et cetera, et cetera. And the more people that heal and clear, the stronger the healing current. So this is group coherence, because we're all ultimately connected. As each of us steps into higher frequency and heals, it makes it easier for the rest. It's like a safer container. And so it makes it easier for more and more people. And the hope is that we can bring as many as possible over into the new world, they're calling it. As we all start stepping into higher frequency, there's a lot of shifts that are associated with that are very positive. They're talking about the ending of Kali Yuga and the beginning of the Golden Age, where we are attuned to energy and what's inside, and supposed to be extrinsic validation, the facade of people, places, and things will be drawn to the energetics underneath the frequency. And then so what we're drawn to will completely change. But we'll be interested in collectives. We will be much more interested in helping people. Any structures that are based on low vibration, low frequency will start to crumble. So this is like healthcare, financial, corporation, education, and new ones will be built instead of based on fear, based on love. So that's what they're talking about. All these shifts that are going to be happening are already starting to happen and will increasingly happen across the collective. So coming back to this, what he talks about, David Clements, is that everyone should do a clearing every day. And he has this, what he calls a disc meditation that he offers to people and on his Patreon channel. And basically he says, you just imagine a spinning double helix that's scanning the body. And I realized this is no different than the gentle twister that I was envisioning, scanning through the chakras of the body. So what I believe is happening in the clearing here is that if you think of trauma in each of the chakras, it's blocked energy. It's very dense. It's very compressed. That's how trauma is. It's very condensed and very dense of layers of trauma. And so what I'm being led to anyway is as I'm moving this spinning double helix or gentle twister through the chakra or the body part, I'm actually uncompressing the matter in that chakra so that it becomes plasma-like and it starts to exhibit quantum characteristics, including self-healing or self-organizing. The reason I feel the magnetic energy is because I'm activating the Sushumna, the central channel, which is like in a transformer, the iron core. And then I'm having people do deep breathing through each chakra. And it's the breathing itself that actually activates and releases the trauma from the system, is what I keep seeing. So when we take a deep breath, that it moves. So what I think we're doing then is we're activating the Ida Pingala, the two energetic channel, the coils around the transformer core, the iron core. And that's what actually starts to activate the energy of the new world at some point when the chakra is clear enough. So it's basically starting to take people down that path of healing and ultimately enlightenment. But what it's doing in the interim is it's activating the matter to become uncompressed. So they start self-healing. And so I'm just catalyzing the own intelligence of their own system and allowing them to self-heal. And so what I found is I can apply the same thing to places. I've done this in our house. When I started noticing there was a lot of weird things that started happening over the last couple of weeks where our appliances started failing, like our refrigerator, our dishwasher, our washing machine, power outage a couple days ago on the day of the Lionsgate. And I was mentioning it to a friend of mine, and she said she was having a similar kind of, she discovered there was a spirit that didn't want her to leave the house because she was going to move. And so she helped that spirit transition. I thought, I've never done that in our place. Maybe I should try it. And so I ended up just scanning our place with the same process. And I ended up feeling blocks in different rooms. And then I started getting images of entities, essentially, spirits that hadn't crossed over that were in the space in different parts of the house and in the backyard. And so I was able to clear them and release them. And the reason it goes out the back of my neck, something I'd read in a book called Gift of the Body by Jonathan Goldman. He's a shaman, basically, who heads up the Santo Daime church in Oregon, and they serve ayahuasca. Santo Daime is basically ayahuasca. And in his book, he talked, and even in his ceremonies, he talks about this cone-like structure from the base, right behind the base of the neck, upwards, and called the chimney. And basically, it's where trauma will often leave the system when it's processed. It's the way energy that leaves the system. And it's also a connection to the collective, like an antenna. So people that are very empathic or very sensitive are picking up what's happening in the collective. That's why some people who are very ill, schizophrenia or bipolar or severe mental illness, it's because they're picking up on what's happening in the collective. And so things are actually getting worse for a lot of people that don't know how to manage or clear that energy. And they're getting more and more ill. And those are individuals that are suffering from some of these symptoms. So what he would do is he'd actually clear the chimney. If it's blocked, then energy, even if you process, it can't leave the system easily. Usually it'll leave either through the ground. So if your ground chakra is blocked, which is your first chakra, it's family of origin, security, stability, and ground. So if your family of origin, when you were little, wasn't secure and stable, you can start to develop, and there was trauma, you will develop blocks in that chakra. So energy can't leave as easily. You can't ground as easily. And same thing with the crown. The crown can get blocked, and then when you're not ready for your dharma, or you need to clear more before it'll open your karma and your history, your trauma, This may not be as open. And if the chimney's blocked, now there's really no way for the energy to leave when you process it. So you keep recirculating trauma. It's like stuff keeps coming back. You don't actually fully heal because it can't leave. And so essentially then I started learning that when I would do that, I would feel clears and people would actually start feeling stuff leaving out the chimney when I was first led to it. So that's another thing that can happen. And that's why I feel stuff leaving through the back of the neck. It's the fastest way for energy to leave the system. And it can also be a way to connect to the collective. So if you're empathic, you can actually start attuning to it. It can be a two-way street. You can start to influence it positively and also tune into what's actually happening and start to absorb some of that energy. And you can actually clear it and ground it. So you can become an instrument for healing of the collective if you do that. So that's essentially what I'm doing. I've discovered that when I go through the chakras, sometimes I've seen or felt entities. People have told me they've had curses in their system that I was able to help clear. And I'll feel more intense releases happening. I've noticed that people who do plant medicine or do a lot of healing work can feel more, and those that are more attuned to their body, they can feel and describe to me what they're experiencing, what's moving, what's coming up, and what traumas and what thoughts or feelings, or they even get messages and images. I also often will get messages or images about what's transpiring or what the trauma was or what they're moving through or why it's releasing now, like different messages that come through. So that's essentially what I'm doing in the healing. So I'm going through each chakra with this gentle twister or double helix and scanning for any excess energy, any debris, or anything that doesn't serve us, and releasing it through the center channel into the earth. What I noticed in each chakra then, one of the things that came to me after doing this for a while that my guides led me to, was that every chakra needs a balancing. So between receiving energy and sending energy out, releasing blocks and replenishing energy. So if you're giving too much, you're not honoring your needs and desires, you keep deferring to other, like what's true for me, you can deplete the energy in that chakra. And so you need someone to help you replenish that energy by sending energy to you. And then if you have a lot of blocks because of trauma or conditioning, you need to release those. And so there's receiving and sending energy in each chakra that allows it to come back to a state of balance that I was led to. And what happened is they started to show me how they could communicate to me when to move between those. So I'll feel my jaw will crack, and then I know I need to go to creating a sphere of light, and then I'll get another signal in my jaw that'll allow me to then send it. And I'm sending it to myself. So what happens is everyone that crosses my path so far has been someone that it's all part of my own healing journey. So they're a reflection of what I need to heal next. So while I heal them, I'm also healing myself, and it allows me to go to the next step in my own healing journey. Yeah, so if I consciously bring someone and not tune into like what's flowing, what's coming to me, it's possible that I'll have someone that's beyond my capacity because I haven't healed that within myself yet, and I'm not ready to heal that level of trauma. And so what I've noticed is I did have one person who I went to who was hearing voices, and I tuned in to the energy and I could feel their entities, and they were speaking to me, and they felt malevolent, like really angry, and said, "We're not leaving until our needs are met." And I could tell that it was beyond my capacity to transmute or release from the system. So I just closed the channel and closed the session and didn't continue. So I can always do that if I notice it. And the way that I transmute them when I first started to learn how to do that, just to give you some more context, is that I was at the Santo Daime church. There's a 3-day ceremony. And I think it was the first time I went. On the first day, I started when the shaman was going to each person, and he was doing this thing where he would do this kind of sound and then throw it over his head. And I realized people were having these visceral physical reactions, that he was pulling trauma out of, or low vibrational energy out of their system and throwing it into the fire that was in the center of the room. But when he would do that, I would feel in my body, I would feel a surge or like an activation kind of a thing. My belly would start hurting, and I realized I was picking up on their trauma, whatever he was moving through their system. And as he started going to each person, I started getting more and more nauseous, and I was trying to clear it from my body like this. And it was too much, and I started throwing up. And then I asked him at the end of the day, "This is what's happening to me. What do you suggest?" And he said, "I think you're tuning into other people's energy, you're picking up their trauma. It's a gift, but you need to learn how to work with the energy or manage it instead of rejecting it," which is what this is. You need to just ground your central channel, especially the root chakra, open your heart chakra, bring your awareness right to the center of the heart chakra, which is where love resides. It's the highest frequency, and it can transmute any lower form of energy or vibration. And then the energy will organize itself, and you'll know what to do. And so what ended up happening in that journey was the next day they opened a portal to invite Archangel Michael and Archangel Raphael into the room. But they said when you open the portal, sometimes dark entities will come in. They're not able to control that. And they assured us when that happens, just ground your energy open your heart and stay focused, and you give it a choice. Either you transmute to light through my heart, or there's the door. So it's not like whoever wants to come in, come on in. Then you'll get all kinds of weird things happening where people feel like they're possessed or they're being taken over by entities or whatever. I think a lot of this is also comes from our own trauma. So there are different models of how to think about this. My feeling is that you can't explain this through a model of trauma. And I have a video about this, but Michael Levin, who's this amazing professor at Tufts University, has studied this, and he said that a tumor is like a group of cells that separates from the whole, has its own set of goals that's different than the collective. And that's how he described a tumor. And what he was suggesting then was each of these little fragments that come away from the whole are like a separate entity, and if they keep getting they start to develop emotional behavioral patterns. There's actually an intelligence to even a group of cells with no spine and no brain, because there's memory that's stored in each cell. And he showed how they were able to start solving problems, little bundles of cells in a petri dish. I think he took lung cells from a human or frog's skin cells or something. And he was able to actually create little robots that would fix things. Anthrobots, he called them. But what he found was, in one of his papers that I was reading, was that if you keep reinforcing and they keep growing, that cancer or that group of cells, and that, if you think about it, humans they start from a single cell, zygote, and they become a multicellular organism. So and they're different levels of intelligence, different size beings and intelligence of beings, like creatures, and different levels of intelligence. And the more cells there are with this intelligence, the more things it can do, like the human. But he was showing this. And what he found was that as this group of cells grows, they start to exhibit emotional behavioral patterns, almost like a being. And if you look at internal family systems, which is a very popular and common psychotherapy technique Dick Schwartz discovered, what he described was the way trauma works is that when you're a child, we have all these, emotions: joy, happiness, playfulness, presence, etc. And when we experience something that's traumatic to the system, as a kid, we don't have as much capacity. So it may not be traumatic to us as an adult, but as a child, because we're more vulnerable and because we're smaller, something can be traumatic to us, and based on how we're wired or what we experience or how scary it is or whatever. And when that happens, let's say there's something that creates shame or fear or sadness. It's an overwhelming emotion for the system, because if you go into fight or flight from trauma, and then what happens is the way the subconscious deals with that is it's too overwhelming for the system, so it wants to bury it in the subconscious and not experience that level of overwhelming emotion again that came from that trauma. So what it does is they call it an exiled part. So those little kids within us that are joyful and happy and whatever take on the burden of this emotion, shame, let's say. And then it's buried deep into the subconscious. And they say it's like an exiled part, a little kid that's buried in the subconscious with this trauma. And anytime it gets triggered, you feel those overwhelming emotions until you heal. You feel those overwhelming emotions, and they can be really scary and disturbing. You're reliving the trauma, whatever happened in that. I mean, if you were scared or ashamed or whatever was happening. So you have the same thoughts, feelings, sensations that you did. You're replaying the scene of the crime, and you're experiencing that as if you were 6 again, or whatever age it occurred at when it gets triggered. And so the way that the subconscious, the way our intelligence deals with that, at least in this model, is that it has an exiled part. It buries it deep in the subconscious, so you don't have to bring that strong, overwhelming emotion into the system. And then it has these protectors. So there are other parts that form in the system. And one set of protectors are managers. So they're like workaholics and perfectionists. They're trying to manage the external environment to prevent that trauma and that exiled part from ever getting triggered, so we don't feel these overwhelming emotions. And so that's what you'll see in some of us, is these tendencies to try to manage the external environment. Inevitably, what ends up happening, something can trigger the trauma. It's not predictable. Any one of the 5 senses, let's say I registered trauma when my dad got upset when I wasn't understanding when he was tutoring me, and I registered a great deal of fear, and that registered in my system as a trauma. And maybe my dad was wearing a particular colored shirt, or the walls were a certain texture, or he was wearing a certain cologne. Anytime those 5 senses, anything from the trauma that triggers the trauma, I'm now again back to being 6 and experiencing that trauma as if it's happening in real time. I'm having all the same overwhelming thoughts, feelings, sensations. And so that's how trauma works. And inevitably, despite having all the managers and all the things we try to manage the situation, the trauma can get triggered. And then essentially, what the system does, the subconscious, as a way to protect us, is it develops these other set of parts that are called firefighters. And essentially, firefighters create immediate scenes. I'll get really angry, or I'll go to something to escape. This is addiction. So maybe I go to chocolate, or I go to drugs, or I go to alcohol, or I watch TV, or I eat junk food, but something that will distract and take me out of those overwhelming emotions. So that's essentially how internal family systems works. And what they say is that when you do this energy healing or psychedelic journeys or Vipassana, you calm the protectors. So then the exiled part can come up because it's safe. And then if you can release the pain of the exiled part through tears, for example, or therapy, you can then reduce the need for the protectors and the pain underneath it. And then that's the process of healing. Or in the context of energy healing, you release the energy of that trauma that's buried deep in the system. As you uncompress the matter by using this tool, this double helix that uncompresses matter to plasma, you can then also start to release the energy of that trauma and you can start to heal. So that's essentially some of the concepts I believe are happening in terms of the healing or the clearing itself. I have people imagine a clear crystalline cylinder that we're standing in the midst of, from the heavens to the earth. It's just a safe container that we do the healing in, that I was led to from a teacher that would do that. And so I do that. David Clements talks about how the most advanced civilizations and beings are made of crystalline. Our fascia, when it's free of trauma, is actually crystalline in nature. It's liquid crystalline, which isn't a coincidence. When we're in our purest state, our most evolved state, we are also crystalline beings. And so now I also have people imagine the Sushumna channel, a clear crystalline tube that comes from heavens into the crown of the head, where the crown chakra is, through the spine and all the energy centers, and then exits at the root chakra, at the sacrum, between the legs, and into the molten core of the earth. So that's the Sushumna channel. And then I have people imagine a gentle vacuum that's moving through the central channel, from the heavens through the body and into the earth, that takes any excess energy or debris or things that don't serve us into the earth to be transmuted to light. And so we don't have to do this ourselves. We can leverage the earth to do this for us. And then what I'll have people also do at the end is I have them imagine pressing a magnet button, and all of your energy from people, places, and things, this is almost like a soul retrieval, will come, fragments of ourselves that may have gotten caught in different places, comes back to us through the root chakra into the heart. And then I have them take a deep breath, beautiful white light coming from the heavens into the crown, into the heart, swirling and twirling with your energy from the earth. And now that energy is used to tonify all the chakras. And essentially then the idea is that the 7 chakras are balanced, aligned, tonified, and energized. And then there's also the sacred heart, which is another concept that I'll bring up. And it's basically between the 5th chakra and the 4th chakra, which is the heart and the voice or the throat. Between the two is what's known as the 4.5 chakra, the sacred heart. And this is where my higher self came in, and this is what David Clements talks about. The higher self comes in through the sacred heart when you're ready. You have to invite them in. So with a yes, or my will is divine will, is something I used to say. You focus on this spot. This is where Tarzan would pound his chest. Tapping it will actually help also activate the sacred heart. And so that's something that we will tap into, and it's where unconditional love can come into the system and move through the channel to help with the healing process. Sometimes we'll tap into the sacred heart or to the Sushumna channel, being grounded, the crown being connected to the heavens, and then imagining unconditional love flowing in and into the part of the body we're trying to help clear. So that's a tool that I've also seen can be really helpful in the experience. I think that's probably everything. And then the rest is just experiencing and seeing what comes up. So hopefully I'll give you some context of what happens in the energy clearing. And any questions, feel free to put in the comments. Thanks so much.